I slipped out of my son's mansion at 3 in the morning, clutching nothing but a thin file folder against my chest. He believes the papers inside grant him ownership of my entire life. He is wrong. He does not know that the accountant he hired is helping me turn his own signature into a noose. I am done begging for love. Now, I am using his greed to take back what is mine. My name is Margaret Doyle, and at 62 years old, I was sneaking out of my own son's house like a common thief. The digital clock on the microwave had read 3 in the morning when I crept past the kitchen island, terrified that the smart home sensors would alert him to my movement. The silence in the massive house was heavy, pressing against my eardrums as I dragged my small carry-on suitcase over the marble floor. I held it slightly off the ground to keep the wheels from rumbling. My other hand clutched a manila file folder against my chest so hard that the edges were digging into my skin. I stepped out into the biting cold of the Denver suburbs. The air tasted like ice and wood smoke. I did not have a single dollar in my coat pockets. I did not have my cell phone. Jacob had taken that away 2 weeks ago, claiming he needed to upgrade the security software, and he simply never gave it back. Every credit card, every bank statement, every link to the outside world was locked in his study. All I had left was this folder. It contained copies of contracts and powers of attorney that he had made me sign in a rush, but they were all I had to fight with. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that made me feel nauseous. I kept moving because his voice was still ringing in my ears from yesterday afternoon. I had been standing just outside the heavy oak door of his home office, a tray of tea in my hands, when I heard him laugh. It was a cold, dismissive sound that I did not recognize. He had been speaking to his lawyer. I heard him say clearly, "Mom is alive or dead. It does not matter. The papers are done. By Monday. She is just a guest in her own assets. I have full control." The memory made my legs shake as I walked down the long, winding driveway. A thin layer of snow dusted the asphalt, crunching softly under my flat shoes. The streetlights cast a sickly yellow glow on the manicured lawns of Cherry Ridge, making the snow look like bruised skin. Somewhere in the distance, the low rumble of a pickup truck broke the stillness. I breathed in short, sharp gasps. My head spun with the terrifying realization that I was officially a fugitive running away from the family I had spent my entire life building. A pair of headlights swept across the road. It was an old sedan with a taxi light on the roof, likely returning from a late-night airport drop-off. I waved my hand frantically, not caring how desperate I looked. The car slowed and rolled to a stop next to me. The driver was a man with grey stubble and tired eyes. He looked at me, a shivering old woman standing in the snow with a folder clutched to her heart, and his eyes narrowed with suspicion. I opened the back door and climbed in before he could drive away. "To Pine Rock Central Bank," I told him, my voice cracking dryly. "Please, as fast as possible." He looked at me in the rearview mirror for a long second, but put the car in gear without asking questions. As we pulled away from the curb, I slumped back against the cracked leather seat. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the folder. I peeled back the corner of the cover. The passing streetlights flickered over the documents inside. I saw the embossed logo of Sterling Arc Capital, the prestigious investment firm where Jacob worked. Below it was the jagged loop of the letter J. It was Jacob's signature on papers he had told me were just formalities to reduce my estate taxes. I looked at that ink and felt a bile rise in my throat. I do not understand all the complex financial language. I whispered to the empty air of the cab. But I understand the eyes of a liar. I knew then that my son was not trying to save me money. He was preparing to erase me from my own life, using the law as his weapon. Suddenly, the driver's phone, which was mounted on the dashboard, buzzed as a news radio application started playing the hourly update. The anchor's voice was crisp and detached. He was talking about a widening investigation into financial fraud targeting the elderly in the metro area. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter. It felt like the universe was mocking me. I was just one of hundreds, perhaps thousands, who had trusted the wrong blood. The taxi jerked to a halt. We were in the city centre now. The Pine Rock Central Bank building loomed above us, a giant slab of glass and steel reflecting the pre-dawn darkness. The sky was still black. I stared up at the imposing structure and squeezed the folder one last time. My mind was clear for the first time in months. I thought, if this strike misses, I will lose everything. My money, my freedom, and even my name. Standing in the cold shadow of the Pine Rock Central Bank, my mind drifted away from the freezing Denver morning. I closed my eyes and allowed the memory to pull me back to the 1970s, to a dusty, forgotten town in western Oklahoma. The wind there did not bite like it did here. It howled, carrying red dirt that coated your teeth and settled deep in your lungs. We lived in a trailer that leaned slightly to the left, and on bad nights, the winter drafts would scream through the cracks in the aluminum walls. My father was a roughneck on the oil rigs. He would come home after weeks away, smelling of crude oil and exhaustion, his skin permanently stained dark. My mother was a waitress at a diner right off the highway. My education did not happen in a classroom. It happened at our scratched kitchen table, watching my mother count her tips. I learned to count by stacking quarters and dimes. I understood very early that those small metal discs were the only thing standing between us and the street. Hold on to these tight. Margaret, my mother would tell me, sliding a stack of coins toward me for the jar. The world does not care if you are hungry. It only cares if you can pay. I took that lesson into my bones. At 16, I walked out of high school. I stood behind a cash register at a grocery store for 8 hours a day, and then I took a bus to an industrial park in Tulsa to work the night shift cleaning offices. I can still smell the sharp sting of industrial ammonia. I can still hear the drone of the heavy vacuum cleaner echoing in the empty hallways. I wore cheap shoes that rubbed my heels raw, blistering and bleeding. But I never stopped moving. The turning point came when Mrs. O'Malley, a sharp-tongued Irish woman who owned the cleaning company, saw me organizing papers on a desk I was supposed to be dusting. She did not fire me. Instead, she recommended me for an administrative assistant position at a small construction firm called Redwood Frontier Developments. It sounded grand, but it was just a small office with big dreams. I started by making coffee and filing invoices. But while the men argued over blueprints and lumber prices, I read the contracts. I studied the cost sheets. I bought used books on personal finance and accounting, reading them during my lunch breaks, scribbling notes into a 99-cent notebook until the spine broke. I learned that the real power was not in the hammering of nails, but in the signing of papers. When I was 30, I married Patrick Doyle. He was a builder with hands the size of shovels and a heart that was too soft for this world. We scraped together every penny we had to buy a rotting house on the outskirts of Austin. Everyone called us crazy. We fixed it up ourselves, working nights and weekends. I painted walls until my shoulders burned, and Patrick laid floors until his knees gave out. when we sold it for a profit. I felt a rush like nothing else. Patrick looked at the check, his eyes wide. Maggie. I never thought I would see this many zeros, he said, his voice shaking. You did this. We did not stop. We bought another broken house, then another. We shifted our strategy from selling to renting. I became the face of the business. I walked into banks and stared down loan officers who thought a woman should not talk about interest rates or amortization schedules. Over 25 years, the Doyle Homestead Group grew from a single crumbling house into a portfolio of rental properties across 3 states. I became a wealthy woman, but I never forgot the trailer in Oklahoma. I still drove a 10-year-old SUV. I still wore comfortable flat shoes because I remembered the pain of those cheap work shoes from my youth. I looked down at my hands, now wrinkled and shaking in the cold. I used these calloused hands to turn rotting wood into a life. I whispered to myself. It broke something inside me to realize that I had built this empire to protect my family. Yet the person trying to rob me was the one person I had built it all for. My own son did not see the sweat and the years in these assets. He only saw a number on a balance sheet that he wanted to claim. As the taxi sped through the empty streets, the rhythmic thumping of the tires against the pavement lulled me into a painful confession. I needed to be honest with myself. This nightmare did not start when Jacob signed those papers. It started 35 years ago, in a sterile hospital room in Dallas. I was 35 when I had him. The doctors had told me for years that my womb was too scarred, that I would never carry a child. When Jacob arrived, screaming and pink, I looked at him as if he were the only miracle God had ever granted. I held that tiny bundle and made a silent, dangerous vow. I swore that this boy would never know the cold draft of a trailer. He would never wear clothes that belonged to someone else first. He would never have to eat expired bread or lie in bed listening to his parents argue about the electricity bill. I kept that promise, and in doing so, I doomed us both. Jacob grew up in neighborhoods that got progressively more expensive. I sent him to the best private schools where the tuition cost more than my father made in 3 years. I paid for piano lessons he hated, basketball camps in Colorado, and summers in Europe. I was always working, always chasing the next deal to pay for it all. So I used money to fill the empty space where my time should have been. Patrick tried to stop me. My husband was a simple man, but he saw things clearly. Maggie, you are drowning him in honey, Patrick would say, shaking his head as he watched Jacob throw a new toy against the wall because it was the wrong color. The boy needs discipline, not just money. He thinks the world owes him a living. He is just a child. Patrick. I would snap back, shielding my son. You are too hard on him because you had it rough. Let him be happy. I shielded him from everything. Jacob never washed a dish. He never mowed a lawn. When he broke a neighbor's window, I paid for it before he could even apologize. When teachers called to complain that he was arrogant or lazy, I drove to the school and argued that they were not challenging his intellect. Instead of making him face the consequences, I taught him that rules were negotiable if you had enough confidence and cash. When he was accepted into a prestigious university in Boston to study finance, I cried with pride. I wrote a check for the full tuition and made a donation to the building fund. Focus on your studies, sweetheart. I told him over the phone, do not worry about a job. I want you to have the freedom to excel. But excellence requires grit, and I had never let him develop any. After graduation, Jacob bounced from job to job. He quit one firm after 3 months because the manager criticized his report. He walked out of another because he felt the office was too small. He would call me late at night, his voice thick with frustration. "Mom, they just don't get it. I wasn't born to fetch coffee for people with half my IQ. It's insulting." And instead of telling him to grow up, I would transfer $5,000 to his account as a temporary allowance. I told myself I was helping him find his footing. I was lying. I was paying him to remain my little boy. Patrick grew quieter in those last years. He spent his evenings on the porch, nursing cheap beer, watching the sun go down. 2 weeks before his heart gave out on a construction site, he looked at me with sad, tired eyes. "You build houses better than anyone I know." "Maggie," he said softly, "but you do not know how to raise a son. You are feeding a wolf. And one day, he's going to get hungry." I pushed those words away then. I could not bear to hear them. But now, sitting in the back of a taxi that smelled of stale tobacco, the truth washed over me. I am not just a victim. I whispered to the reflection in the window. I am the architect of this disaster. I created Jacob. I built a man who believes he owns everything he touches, including his mother, 6 months after Patrick was put into the ground. Jacob brought Vanessa Cole home. She was a public relations specialist, with hair the colour of spun gold and a smile that appeared on command, perfect and impenetrable. She walked into my living room, scanned the furniture, and then looked at me. It was not a warm look. It was the look of an appraiser estimating the value of an estate sale. "Mom, I want you to meet the woman who is going to change everything for me," Jacob said, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. We held the wedding at a vineyard in Napa Valley. It was an intimate affair that cost me nearly $80,000. I remember sitting at the reception, watching Vanessa swirl her glass of expensive Pinot Noir. She was asking me about the Doyle Homestead Group. She did not ask about the tenants or the history of the buildings. She asked about the occupancy rates and the total square footage. When I told her the numbers, her eyes did not soften with admiration for my hard work. They sharpened. That was not the gaze of a daughter-in-law. It was the gaze of an auditor conducting an inventory. Soon after, they decided to move to Denver. They found a sprawling, modern mansion in Cherry Ridge, a neighborhood for the new rich where the driveways were heated and the neighbors never spoke. The price tag was astronomical. "The interest rates are killing us." "Mom," Jacob told me over the phone, "but if you co-sign, if you put your name on the mortgage with us, we get the prime rate." I signed. Of course I signed. I wanted them to have the start I never had. Then came the twins, Lila and Emma. When they were born, I packed up and rented a small place nearby so I could be the grandmother I had always dreamed of being. I cooked meals. I bought toys. I spent my days changing diapers and rocking babies while Vanessa went to the gym or met with friends for brunch. For a brief, blinding moment, I thought this was happiness. I thought I had bought my way into a real family. Jacob landed a job at Sterling Arc Capital, a firm that specialized in aggressive real estate funds and tech startups. He wore tailored Italian suits and spoke in a language of leverage and equity. "It is my turn now," he said, pacing around my kitchen. "You built the foundation, Mum, but I am going to make money for everyone." Vanessa began to use her PR skills to polish the family image. She started organizing charity galas that I sponsored. I would stand in the back, holding a glass of lukewarm water, watching her glide across the stage. She would take the microphone and thank the donors, introducing herself as the co-founder of the Doyle Homestead Group, and the visionary behind our philanthropy. She had never hammered a nail. She had never dealt with a flooded basement at 2 in the morning. Yet there she was, wearing my legacy like a stolen coat. The atmosphere at our Sunday dinners grew heavy. The air in that glass-walled dining room always felt thin, like there was not enough oxygen for all of us. One evening, I tried to bring up the subject of my will. I wanted to ensure that the properties were protected in a trust for the girls. Jacob laughed, waving his fork in the air. "Mum, stop being so morbid. You do not need to worry about legal fees for a will. All of this, it is all going to stay in this house anyway." He said it as a joke, but his eyes remained flat. It sounded less like reassurance and more like a declaration of ownership. Over the next few years, the dynamic shifted. It was subtle at first, then blatant. I paid for the upgrades to their smart home system. I bought the new luxury SUV when Vanessa decided the 2-year-old model was unsafe. I wrote the checks for Lila and Emma's private tuition. The words "thank you" disappeared from their vocabulary. When I handed over a check for $15,000 for a summer camp, Vanessa just slid it into her purse. "Great. That is handled," she said, checking her watch. "Oh, can you pick the girls up today? I have a yoga retreat." I sat in my car that afternoon, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I realized I had become a utility to them. I was not a mother or a grandmother. I was an endless fund, a walking wallet that they opened whenever they needed to upgrade their lifestyle. "I am doing this for the girls," I whispered to the empty car, trying to force the lump in my throat back down. This is what a mother does. She gives until she is empty. But deep down, as I looked at the massive house that I was paying for, I knew I was not being loved. I was being harvested. The walls of the Cherry Ridge mansion began to feel less like a home and more like a high-security vault where I was the prisoner. It started with a suggestion that dripped with false concern. Vanessa sat me down one morning, her hand resting gently on mine. "Margaret, why are you keeping that old house in Austin?" she asked, tilting her head. "The maintenance is a headache, and you are too old to be flying back and forth. Let us handle the sale for you. It will be one less burden." I agreed, thinking she was right. But when the sale closed, I never saw the check. The $350,000 went straight into a joint management account that Jacob controlled. When I asked about it, Jacob waved his hand dismissively. "I put it there to keep your tax brackets stable." "Mom," he said, "it is just to make your life easier so you do not have to stress about the math." I gave up my independence piece by piece. I moved into the guest suite on the second floor, thinking I would be surrounded by family. Instead, I found myself living as an intruder. The kitchen was Vanessa's domain. If I wanted to make myself a sandwich, I felt I had to ask for permission. I would walk into the living room and stop, feeling the air change as Vanessa and Jacob stopped talking. I found myself asking if I could use the washing machine, terrified of disrupting their perfect routine. The humiliation became physical one Tuesday afternoon at the grocery store. I was buying ingredients to bake a pie for the girls. I swiped my credit card. The machine beeped a harsh error tone. Declined. I tried again. Declined. The cashier looked at me with pity. I walked out of the store empty-handed, my face burning, when I got home. Vanessa did not even look up from her magazine. "Oh." Jacob consolidated the accounts, she said casually. He needed to track the household expenses better. "Just give me your other cards." "Margaret, It is simpler this way. I handed them over. I was a 62-year-old woman with a net worth of millions. Yet I was standing there emptying my purse like a naughty child. I tried to fight back with questions. I asked Jacob about the monthly rent checks from my apartment complexes. Where is the cash flow going? Jacob, I asked during dinner. He cut into his steak aggressively. I am reinvesting it for you, Mum. You do not need to worry. In this economy, you have to play big to keep your money. Just trust me. But my trust was fracturing. The real fear set in when I walked past the sunroom and saw Vanessa on a video call on her tablet. The man on the screen had greasy hair and a cynical sneer. It was her brother, Travis Cole. I paused behind a fern, holding my breath. We need to execute a shadow transfer, Vanessa whispered, her eyes darting toward the door. And the power of attorney needs to be permanent, not conditional. We cannot have her revoking it. My heart hammered against my ribs. Shadow transfers. Permanent power. These were not terms of protection. They were terms of theft. A few days later, a tenant from my building in Tulsa called my personal cell, which I had hidden in my drawer, complaining about a leak. I immediately called a contractor I knew to fix it. Minutes later, Jacob stormed into my room, his face purple with rage. "What are you doing?" he screamed. "You are ruining my tax strategy. You cannot just move money around like that." He scolded me right in front of Vanessa, who stood in the doorway with a smirk. He was treating the woman who built the roof over his head like she was incompetent. The final cruelty was how they used the children. Lila and Emma stopped coming to my room. When I suggested taking them to the park, Vanessa blocked the way. "Not today." "Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "They have homework. And besides, you know how you get confused with directions lately. It is not safe." I heard her later, whispering to them in the hallway. "Grandma is old, and she forgets things. Sweetie, do not bother her." Last night, the trap revealed its teeth. The house was dark. I was walking down the hall to get a glass of water when I heard Jacob's voice coming from his home office. The door was cracked open. He was speaking to someone on speakerphone. "I do not care what she thinks," Jacob said, his voice cold and steady. "When we prove she is mentally unstable, the court will grant me full guardianship. Those properties will be excellent collateral for the new loan. We just need the doctor to sign off." I backed away, my feet silent on the carpet. I retreated to my room and locked the door. My hands were shaking so violently I had to sit on the floor. I remembered what Patrick had told me before he died. "One day, you will have to choose save the money or save yourself." I sat in the dark and realized with a terrifying clarity that it was too late to choose. Both my life and my fortune were on the chopping block, and the executioner was sleeping down the hall. I huddled in the back seat of the taxi, the streetlights flickering over the documents in my lap. But my mind was back in my bedroom at the Cherry Ridge mansion, just 3 hours ago. That was when I had finally worked up the courage to open the old laptop I kept hidden beneath a stack of winter sweaters in my suitcase. I had not turned it on in months because Jacob always insisted I use the iPad he controlled. I had connected to the neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi network to avoid triggering any alerts on Jacob's system. My hands had shaken as I logged into the bank account I thought I still controlled. I typed in the password, praying it had not been changed. It worked. But when the page loaded, the breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. The balance should have been over $200,000. It was $4,000. I clicked on the transaction history, my eyes scanning the screen. There were dozens of transfers, all going to an entity called Silver Delta Advisors LLC. I remembered that name. Jacob had mentioned it once over dinner, casually calling it a consulting partner for your portfolio. I did a quick search on the State Business Registry. Silver Delta was not a consulting partner. It was a shell company registered to a post office box in Delaware, and the registered agent was a college friend of Jacob's. They were not managing my money. They were siphoning it. I felt a cold sweat prickling my neck. I opened a new tab and went to my email provider. I had to answer 3 security questions to reset the password because Jacob had locked me out. Once I was in, I went straight to the trash folder. That was where I found the smoking gun. There were dozens of notifications from a digital signature platform. Completed power of attorney, completed loan modification, completed deed transfer. I opened one of the PDF files. It was an application for a massive line of credit secured against my apartment complex in Tulsa, and there, at the bottom, was a clause that made my blood run cold. It read, "Client acknowledges full transfer of asset management and financial decision-making to Jacob Doyle." I closed my eyes, and the memory washed over me. I saw the living room from 2 weeks ago. Vanessa was standing over me, smiling, placing a glass of expensive red wine in my hand. Jacob was holding his iPad, scrolling quickly. "Just sign here." "Mom," he had said, tapping the screen. "It is just to confirm your mailing address for the tax documents. We do not want the IRS sending letters to the old house. Are you sure I had asked—" "Oh, Margaret, do not be so suspicious." Vanessa had laughed, her voice light and airy. "We already read it. Drink your wine." I had signed. I had signed my life away for a glass of Merlot and a lie. I kept digging through the emails. I found a calendar invite from a doctor I had never met. A Dr. Aris. The subject line was, "Evaluation for M. Doyle." Attached was a preliminary intake form filled out by Jacob. Under reason for visit, he had typed, "Patient exhibits signs of advanced memory disorder, paranoia, and inability to manage daily affairs." I have never forgotten a birthday. I balance my own checkbook. I remember the price of lumber in 1982, but on paper, my son was constructing a version of me that was senile and helpless. Then I found the draft. It was a legal petition addressed to the district court. Petition for conservatorship. Petitioner Jacob Doyle. Ward Margaret Doyle. The filing date was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. He was not just stealing my money. He was preparing to lock me inside my own body, legally stripping me of the right to say no. I was about to shut the laptop when I saw one last invoice. It was from Sterling Arc Capital, Jacob's firm. It was a bill for a consulting session. The description read, "Asset restructuring for end-of-life planning and tax minimization." The consultant listed was a woman named Nora Blake. I stared at that name. Nora Blake. She was the accountant he had hired to bury me. She was the one drawing the maps for his theft. But as I looked at the detailed, methodical way she had organized the theft in the invoice, a desperate thought took root in my mind. She was a professional. She was doing a job based on the information Jacob gave her. She thinks I am senile. I whispered to the empty air of the taxi, clutching the printed invoice in my hand. She thinks she is helping a dutiful son manage a dying mother's estate. I looked at the invoice again. If Nora Blake was the one building this cage, then she was the only one who knew how to take it apart. I did not know her, but I knew that numbers did not lie. Only people did. I had to bet my entire future on the hope that she was just a calculator, not a conspirator. The lobby of Pine Rock Central Bank felt less like a financial institution and more like a mausoleum for money. The floors were polished to a mirror shine, and the air was so cold it stung my exposed skin. I marched up to the front desk, my knuckles white as I gripped the handle of my suitcase. I need to access my safe deposit box and freeze all activity on the Doyle Homestead accounts, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset and a bored expression, typed a few keys. Her face remained blank. I am sorry. Mrs. Doyle, your accounts are flagged for dual authorization. You cannot access them without Mr. Jacob Doyle present. It is in the system notes. That is my money, I snapped, my exhaustion fraying the edges of my patience. I earned it while he was still learning to walk. I do not need his permission to. Is there a problem here? The voice came from behind me. It was sharp, precise, and authoritative. I turned to see a woman standing near the elevators. She looked to be in her early 30s, dressed in a navy blue suit that was tailored to perfection. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail. She was holding a tablet against her chest. She looked at me, then at the receptionist. Did you say Margaret Doyle? Yes. Ms. Blake, the receptionist said, looking relieved. She is demanding access without the co-signer. The woman stepped closer. Her eyes were a piercing hazel, and they swept over me not with kindness, but with a clinical curiosity. She was analyzing me. I am Nora Blake. I am the senior financial consultant handling the restructuring of your estate. Your son hired me. I know who you are, I said, my voice raspy. I saw your invoice. You are the one helping him bury me. Nora blinked, surprised by my bluntness. She hesitated for a split second, then gestured toward a glass-walled conference room. We should talk. Privately. Inside the room, the silence was absolute. I sat down, keeping my coat on. Nora sat opposite me, placing her tablet on the table face down. She looked at me, waiting for me to speak, searching for the signs of dementia that Jacob had surely told her about. I cannot show you the specific trust documents without Jacob present. Nora began, her tone professional but guarded. I have a fiduciary duty to the client who engaged me, and technically, that is Jacob acting on your behalf. He is not acting on my behalf, I said, cutting her off. He is acting on his own. I slammed my folder onto the glass table. I opened it and spread the papers out. The theft was there in black and white. The unauthorized transfers to Silver Delta Advisors LLC. The emails where Jacob joked about streamlining the assets. And finally, the draft of the guardianship petition. Read it, I commanded. Read what he says about me. Nora picked up the guardianship draft. As her eyes scanned the legal jargon, I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face. She stopped at the paragraph describing my mental state. He claims I leave the stove on, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. He claims I get lost in my own neighborhood. He claims I am a danger to myself. Tell me, Ms. Blake, do I look like a woman who does not know where she is? Nora looked up. The professional mask slipped. He told me. He said you were confused. He said the restructuring was urgent because you were vulnerable to scams. He said he wanted to protect the legacy you built. He is the scam, I whispered. And you are the tool he is using to pick the lock. Nora looked back down at the papers. Her finger traced a signature on a loan application, a document that authorized a massive withdrawal from my primary equity line. "I did not prepare this document," she said quietly. "This date. This was 2 days ago. I told him we could not move any assets until the trust was finalized." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw anger in her eyes. It was the anger of a professional who realizes she has been played. "I have not signed the final trust documents yet," Nora admitted. Something felt off. The way he talked about you did not match the woman I heard on the background of his calls. He described a ghost, but you sounded sharp. I leaned forward. "I am offering you a deal, Nora, a dangerous one. If you help me, if you stand with me and use your records to prove he is manipulating the system, I will pay your full fee personally. I will hire your firm to manage the real estate portfolio properly. I will protect you." I took a breath. "But if you walk out that door and let him do this, you are not just an accountant. You are an accomplice to a crime." Nora stared at the sleek surface of the table. She was weighing her career against her conscience. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Then, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. "I do not just have records," Nora said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I have insurance." She looked at the door to make sure no one was watching, then slid the drive across the table to me. "I record my discovery meetings. It is standard practice for liability, though clients usually forget after 5 minutes," she said. "Last week, during a video conference, Jacob forgot to mute himself when he took a call from his wife. I did not stop the recording. She looked me dead in the eye. He said, 'I do not care what Mum thinks. Just get the papers stamped. I need the judge to see the word incompetent so I can leverage the buildings for the tech deal.' I kept the file because I had a bad feeling I might need it to defend my license." I stared at the small silver device. It was small enough to swallow, but it contained the thunder that would bring my son's world crashing down. "Play it," I said. "I need to hear him say it." We did not go to the police station. Instead, Nora drove me straight to a nondescript office building in downtown Denver, far away from the gleaming glass towers where firms like Sterling Arc Capital operated. She introduced me to Rebecca Hart, an attorney who specialized in elder law. Rebecca did not look like the lawyers on television. She wore a simple grey suit. Her office was cluttered with case files, and her eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. We sat in a conference room with a view of the city skyline, the very city my son was trying to steal from under my feet. I recounted everything. I told them about the isolation, the gaslighting, the missing money, and the conversation I had overheard. While I spoke, Nora connected her laptop to the projector. She pulled up a detailed spreadsheet she had compiled during the car ride. It was a timeline of every transaction Jacob had made under the guise of supporting mother. Rebecca studied the screen, tapping a pen against her lips. "This is not just mismanagement. Mrs. Doyle, this is a textbook case of financial exploitation of an elder. And if he files that petition for guardianship based on false medical records, it is a fraudulent guardianship attempt. That is a felony." She stood up and walked to the whiteboard. "We have a choice. We can stop him now, or we can destroy him. To destroy him, we need a plan." She outlined 3 steps. First, we had to secretly revoke every power of attorney I had ever signed. Second, we needed to file a protective order to block him from seizing immediate control. Third, and most dangerous. We had to prepare a countersuit based on his own signature. Nora opened a folder on her screen. "I have the ammunition," she said, her voice steady. "I have the audio recording of him admitting he knows you are competent. I have the internal emails where he instructed me to draft a trust that bypasses your consent. I also have the metadata showing he accessed your accounts from his IP address at times when he claimed you were the one making transfers." Rebecca nodded. "That is good. But we need more. Margaret, I need you to go to a clinic in Boulder today. It is a neurological institute with an unimpeachable reputation. I want a full cognitive evaluation. We need a doctor who has never met your son to certify that you are sane, sharp, and capable." The room went silent as Nora suddenly leaned closer to her screen. Her face went pale. "Oh my God," Nora whispered. "I missed this." "What is it?" I asked, leaning in. Nora turned the screen toward us. It was an email chain between Jacob and his contact at Silver Delta Advisors. Look at the subject line. Temporary title transfer. He is not just borrowing against the properties. He is suggesting moving the deeds of 3 rental units into Silver Delta's name for 90 days. He says it is to clean up the balance sheet before the court hearing if Mom has an episode. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. That is not tax strategy. That is laundering. He is trying to hide assets from the court inventory so that when he becomes your guardian, those properties do not technically belong to you anymore. He is stealing them before the judge even bangs the gavel. My hands clenched into fists on the table. "So we stop him now," I said. "We go to the bank, and we stop him." Rebecca shook her head slowly. "No. If we stop him now, he will claim it was a misunderstanding. He will say he was just getting advice. He has not filed the papers with the court yet. He has not committed the perjury." She looked at me with a cold, calculating intensity. "We let him file. We let him walk into that courtroom and swear under oath that you are incompetent and that he has fully disclosed all assets. We let him trap himself. And then we drop the hammer." It was a terrifying strategy. It required me to play the victim for a few weeks longer. It meant letting my son believe he had won. "If you want to catch a man who loves control," I said, remembering how Jacob used to smile when he won a game of chess against me as a boy, "you have to let him believe he is the one moving the pieces." I looked at Nora, then at Rebecca. "Do it. Let him file the petition. I want him to sign his name to the lie. I want his signature to be the thing that ends him." For the first time since I fled the house, I did not feel like prey. I felt like the hunter. I was ready to dismantle my son's life with the same meticulous attention to detail I had used to build it. 3 weeks later, the process server handed me a thick envelope at the door of my rental apartment. I knew exactly what was inside, but I made my hands tremble as I took it. I called Jacob immediately, pitching my voice to sound frail and confused. "Jacob, there are legal papers here. It says you want to be my guardian. I do not understand. It is just a formality." "Mom," he soothed, his voice dripping with condescension. "You know you have been forgetting things. I just want to keep you safe from scammers. Trust me." I trusted him to be exactly who he was. The preliminary hearing took place in a small courtroom that smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. Jacob looked immaculate in a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car. Vanessa sat beside him, wearing a modest black dress and no jewelry, her face scrubbed of makeup to make her look exhausted and selfless. They were playing the role of the burdened children to perfection. Jacob stood before the judge, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses, and painted a portrait of a woman who was falling apart. It started small. "Your Honor," Jacob said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "She would leave the stove on for hours. One night, we found her walking down the street at 2 a.m, looking for a dog we buried 10 years ago. We are terrified she is going to hurt herself. It was a lie. I have never owned a dog." Vanessa sobbed quietly into a tissue. "We just want to protect Mom," she whispered to the court reporter. "There are so many people out there hunting for the elderly. We cannot let her lose everything she worked for." My lawyer, Rebecca, sat stone still. She did not object. She did not interrupt. She let them pile lie upon lie until their confidence was absolute. Jacob glanced at me with pity, thinking he had already won. Then, it was our turn. Rebecca stood up slowly. She did not raise her voice. She simply walked to the bench and placed a heavy stack of documents before the judge. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, "the petitioner claims my client is suffering from severe cognitive decline. However, I submit into evidence a comprehensive neurological evaluation conducted 3 days ago by the Boulder Institute for Brain Health. It confirms that Margaret Doyle scores in the 99th percentile for cognitive function for her age group." Jacob stiffened. "Furthermore," Rebecca continued, sliding another document forward, "I submit a forensic accounting of the petitioner's filings. The financial disclosure he submitted to this court omits 3 commercial properties and lists a bank account balance that is 80% lower than the actual figures." "Objection," Jacob's lawyer stood up. "These are clerical errors. We have a witness who can clarify that." Rebecca said, "We call Nora Blake." The colour drained from Jacob's face. He turned around as the back doors opened. Nora walked in, clutching her briefcase. She did not look at him. She walked straight to the stand and took the oath. "Ms. Blake," Rebecca asked, "what was your role with Mr. Doyle?" "I was hired to restructure Mrs. Doyle's estate," Nora said, her voice clear. "Mr. Doyle explicitly instructed me to create a trust that removed his mother's control. When I asked about her input, he told me to document that she was losing her grip and that the court needed to see those specific words." Jacob stood up, his composure cracking. "She is lying, she is. She is a disgruntled contractor." Rebecca turned to the judge. "We also have a recording of a video conference between Ms. Blake and the petitioner." She pressed a button on her laptop. Jacob's voice filled the silent courtroom, loud and undeniable. "I do not care what Mum thinks. Just get the papers stamped. She believes the papers are for the bank. She won't read them. As long as my name is next to hers, I can handle the rest." A collective gasp went through the gallery. The judge looked up from his notes, his eyes narrowing at Jacob. Jacob was panic-stricken. That is edited. It is out of context. She is trying to blackmail me." Rebecca calmly held up a piece of paper. "This is the metadata for the file. Unedited. And this is an email Mr. Doyle sent 5 minutes after that meeting, stating, 'The proposal we discussed suits me perfectly.' It links him directly to the fraud." The judge banged his gavel, the sound like a gunshot in the small room. "This hearing is suspended," the judge declared, his voice cold. "I am denying the temporary guardianship immediately. Furthermore, I am ordering an independent investigation into all financial transactions between the petitioner and the respondent's estate. Mr. Doyle." I suggest you remain in the state." Jacob stood there, his mouth open, looking at the empty air where his victory was supposed to be. He turned to look at me, his eyes wide with shock. For the first time in his life, he realized the weapon he had forged had turned around in his hand. I looked back at him, my face completely dry, and I did not blink. The official hearing regarding the allegations of financial abuse took place 3 weeks later. The courtroom was packed to capacity, and I noticed several local reporters in the back row, scribbling furiously in their notepads. This case had become a spectacle, a warning sign for every wealthy retiree in Denver. The prosecutor did not waste time. He paced in front of Jacob, who was sweating under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Doyle," the prosecutor said, holding up a bank statement, "can you explain why $200,000 was transferred from your mother's primary holding account to Silver Delta Advisors, and then, 48 hours later, moved to a personal account in Miami under your name?" "It was a management fee," Jacob stammered, loosening his tie. "Standard industry practice." Rebecca Hart stood up then. She walked to the evidence table and produced a document that looked like it had been pulled from a fire. It was the original contract for the temporary sale of my largest apartment complex. "This contract," Rebecca announced, her voice ringing off the walls, "bears the signature of Margaret Doyle. However, a handwriting analysis confirms it is a forgery. But the most interesting part is below that. Jacob Doyle signed as the advisor approving the sale. He was selling my client's property to himself, using a fake signature to facilitate the theft, before Jacob could invent another lie. Nora stepped forward with a printout of an internal email from Sterling Arc Capital. She handed it to the bailiff. "Read the highlighted section, please," Rebecca requested. The bailiff cleared his throat and read aloud. "Just a few more steps until all those houses are officially off the old lady's name and listed as my investment assets. She will never know the difference." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Vanessa sat frozen in the front row, staring straight ahead, her face pale. She knew the ship was sinking, and she was already calculating how to detach herself from the wreck. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Doyle, would you like to speak?" I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my hands were steady. I looked at my son, then at the judge. "Your Honor," I said softly, "I did not inherit my money. I scraped grease off diner tables in Oklahoma. I cleaned toilets in Tulsa. I built every wall and painted every ceiling. The most painful part of this is not that he took my money. It is that he looked at his own mother and did not see a person. He saw an optimization problem to be solved." Jacob looked down at his shoes. Rebecca then played her final card. She placed a thick document on the podium. "Your Honor, the petitioner has prepared a trust, drafted by Mrs. Blake under duress, which strips my client of all rights. However, that document is a draft." She slammed another file down next to it. "This," Rebecca declared, "is the revocable living trust that Margaret Doyle established 4 days ago with the assistance of Ms. Blake. It transfers all legal ownership of her assets to an independent corporate trustee. It revokes all prior beneficiary designations involving Jacob Doyle. It suspends his access to every single account, effective immediately." Jacob's head snapped up. His eyes were wide with horror. He realized in that second that he was not just in legal trouble, he was broke. His plans to leverage my property for his debts were dead. The judge did not hesitate. "The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice." The court recognizes Margaret Doyle as fully competent. Furthermore, I am forwarding this entire evidentiary file to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation into fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck wood with a finality that echoed in my bones. In the hallway outside, the air was thick with tension. Jacob was being yelled at by his defense attorney. Vanessa stood 10 feet away from him, her arms crossed, looking at him with a mixture of fear and disgust. When Jacob saw me, he lunged forward, his face twisted. You ruined me, he hissed, tears of rage in his eyes. Mom, how could you? He stopped short when Nora stepped in front of me, holding the file containing his forged signature like a shield. He looked at her, then at me, and he crumbled. I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding Denver sunlight. The air was cold, but the sun was bright. I did not look back at the building. I did not look back at the son I had lost to greed. I did not win because I am rich. I said to the wind. I won because for the first time in my life, I stopped begging to be loved and started loving myself enough to say enough. The glass doors swished shut behind me, sealing the past inside. Thank you so much for listening to my story and walking this difficult path with me today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on the situation. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit the like button, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.